when we talk about open source security, first of all, and I would say software in general, we talk about vulnerabilities, right? We talk about security, it's about identifying vulnerabilities. Not every vulnerability will be exploited, right? So there's a big difference there. And the example that I always use, and I found it kind of easy to understand, is, well, an application, by the way, can have multiple vulnerabilities, right? Not one or two, but it could be, you know, a couple of dozens of vulnerability because it's an extensive application with lots of code and a lot of libraries and a lot of components. Well, so the analogy is vulnerability. If you are in your house or you're in your apartment or your office and you leave the door wide open, that's a vulnerability. Doesn't mean that something bad is going to happen. You are just creating a vulnerability right there, right? You left the door wide open, you left. If someone comes and it steals something, right, that's an exploit on your vulnerability. So the same thing applies to software and open source software. There are many vulnerabilities out there. Really, the main issue is if there's an exploit on that vulnerability, right? And in some cases, some vulnerabilities have different ways to be exploited, right? So it makes it even harder to address that. So not every part of the application might be affected by the vulnerability, and that's the other point, right? So there's what is called the vulnerable method. So is the vulnerability really in just one part of the functionality? Just makes it vulnerable, that method, or it's in everything on the library. So there's other things that have to be under consideration. A couple of other concepts: CVEs, common vulnerability and exposures. That's basically the ID that it's disclosed, that it's available on the National Vulnerability Database. It's disclosed, it's public, now everyone knows based on that CVE. And then every vulnerability, it's assigned a severity, numbers from 0 to 10, 10 being the most critical vulnerabilities. And that's a score that is the CVSS score, the Common Vulnerability Score System. So these are some of the terms when we talk about open source security. There are many different types of vulnerabilities. OWASP, open source organization that looks after kind of web applications, vulnerabilities and security and vulnerabilities, they've been listing the top 10 types of vulnerabilities in web applications, but it really applies to all software, open source software. They kind of updated the list relatively recently, but what you see there on the slide, it covers the majority of, like, those are the top 10 types of vulnerabilities, and includes within that list, it includes things like, injections. Could be LDAP injection, or could be just code injection, right? That's how you get malware into someone else's software. Cross-site scripting, that's also a popular type of vulnerability, which fits into this top 10 categories. But also includes things like, obviously the security at login and identification and authentication type of failures. Those are obviously vulnerabilities. So I would recommend, if you're not familiar with the OWASP top 10, to take a look at that, read the descriptions. Developers should be actually trained on the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, so they can avoid this type of vulnerabilities in their code, right? And that's a key part, right? So one of the ways to address security, open source security, software in general, application security, is kind of educating, enabling developers, so developers become more security aware, as opposed to just leave that job to the security office, right? To the responsibility of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. So you want developers to be familiar with this top 10. Highly recommended to go and send your developer teams, or if you're a developer, to kind of go and learn more about this, so you can avoid this type of vulnerabilities in your code.